everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be exploring the Rolyan splinting materials, and I've got a whole wealth of them here, and we're going to explore all the different aspects and why you might use some for some splints and some for others. Just to sort of introduce myself, I'm really honoured to be the clinical ambassador for performance health. I'm a clinical specialist hand therapist and have been so for many, many years. I also teach in my company NES Hand Therapy Training, and I'm the immediate past president of the International Federation for Societies of Hand Therapy. And I look forward to what 2023 will bring in my relationship with performance health. So let's move on and have a look at the types of materials. Now, don't worry, everything is being recorded. So if you get called away, we'll be sending you the link so that you can watch the webinar, and you can also ask questions. So if you'd like to put your questions into the chat, then when I've finished my demonstration, there'll be plenty of time for me to address the questions that you're posing to me. So let's move on to a little presentation before we get practical. So there is a spectrum of materials by performance health. So we run from 3 different families of materials, and they go between being very resistant to stretch and rigid, those that are highly conformable and moldable, and then our memory materials. And I'm actually going to look at all of these materials under those 3 titles. So within the range of Rolyan materials, you can pretty much manage any of your caseloads, whether it be pediatrics or neuro or hand therapy, orthopedics, plastics. There is something here for you with everything. All of these materials come in different thicknesses and different perforation, and they have different bonding capabilities. Again, we'll explore that a little bit as we go through. So, physical characteristics of the materials. The most simple way is looking at materials in terms of how thick they are. So you've got a 3.2 material, which is usually the thickest one ever used on the hand and wrist, and a 2.4 millimeter and a 1.6. Something people often ask is, well, why would I choose a lighter material? Is that just for pediatrics, or is it just for small splints? But no, it isn't. You can really make a big splint out of a very thin material as long as you've got your theory around construction. You have lots of moldability, lots of angles, lots of movement in the splint. So I'll show you what I mean by that. But obviously, if you use a very moldable material and you're using a thick, heavy one, then just have to be very careful that it doesn't extend when you pick it out of the splint pan. So perforations, there's a whole variety of different perforations, and I've just got a few of them here. And you might want to choose perforation. It's not really helpful in terms of air exchange unless you have something that is super, super perforated. So you have to select very carefully because it will affect the quality of the material. So it will affect how moldable it is, and it will affect how you cut it. And of course the edges. So let's have a look at that first family. So we've got your more resistant materials. I'm just going to put a small piece of each of the 3, I know it looks like 4, but there's actually 3 here, into the splint pan. So we've got sand splint. So this is one of the original materials that Rolyan had, along with easy form. These are the ones that existed way back when I trained many, many years ago. So the sand splint is the only material that they have that is made from a synthetic polymer that is full of rubber. So this is going to behave very differently to the other materials. And when I go on and make a splint, you'll be able to see how differently you have to handle that material. Then you've got easy form, which is highly resistant to stretch, but actually with a few little tricks, which I'll show you, you can actually get really lovely drape around edges. And as you cut it, it makes a beautifully smooth cut. If you're less familiar with splinting, EasyForm is a brilliant go-to material because it pretty much can do everything. And then the other one in this family is Synergy. So Synergy provides maximum resistance to stretch and with a relatively moderate drape. So then we move on to the high conformability materials. So we've got Polyform, Polyflex 2, now don't get them muddled up with each other, and Tailor Splint. And these are the three really very moldable, very easy to get them around corners. They're really good for thumb splints, for example, or anything that has to be intricate that you need to bring in, for example, around the side of a finger, because they are very, very moldable. But handling these three materials when you've got a bigger piece gets more difficult because they will stretch. So what's the difference? Well, Tailor Splint, I would say, again, if you're new to very moldable materials, Tailor Splint has that, it's quite manageable. So it's not going to run away from you. Tailor Splint is very versatile. So it's sort of a moderate stretch and a moderate moldability. So that's a really good starter one. Polyflex 2 has the most phenomenal amount of drape. So if you want a very, very intricate fit, then Polyflex 2 is absolutely fantastic. It does retain a little bit of flexibility when it's cool. On the other hand, Polyform is also really drapeable, really moldable, but when it's cool, it's completely rigid. So if you're doing something that is vaguely circumferential, people might struggle to get their hands on it because it has no bounce once it's completely cooled through. And then the third family are your memory materials. So memory materials behave very differently because when you heat them and stretch them, then if you reheat them, they will go back to their original shape and size. So this is the Aquaplast family. And one of the lovely things about the Aquaplast family is it comes in glorious colours. So I've got a few here. We've got silver, metallic silver, we've got metallic blue, we've got purple, but it also comes in pink and green and pale blue, and patients absolutely love it because you've got the watercolours, sort of an option to make it a bit more custom for them. Now you've got Aquaplast and Aquaplast T. The difference with Aquaplast T is that it will resist sticking to itself. Aquaplast itself is very sticky to itself. So if it folds onto itself, it will stick. But Aquaplast T has a little bit of a coating on it so that it doesn't stick. Aquaplast Pro Drape has a little bit more drape, although to be honest, all of the Aquaplast families have a good drape with them. And Aquaplast Resilient is just a little bit less drapeable. But your core are going to be your Aquaplast T, and all the glorious colours. So before we just go on and look at the practical around these different materials, don't forget, obviously, Performance Health has got a whole load of other hand therapy and OT and physio equipment and consumables. But we're not going to go into those right now. Like I said, if you start thinking of questions, just pop them in the chat box and we'll get to them as we finish. So let's head to some demonstration. I'm just going to cover that so I don't get it wet. So we've got here the 4 really nice materials that are a little bit more rigid. So this one is Synergy. Now you can see it's really moldable, so it does go around corners, but if I want to make an intimate change, it will bounce back. So you have to keep working it, and you'll see that as I make a splint with it, and I'm going to demo for you how we make a splint. It holds its heat very well, which means that you have a very long working time. So again, if you're less familiar with splinting, then Synergy does allow you to have a longer working time, which works really nicely. It might be better for your larger splints, such as an elbow or a forearm-based splint. And then we've got, now don't you go putting your fingers into a splint pan, but I've done it for so many years. So then we've got easy form. And as I've said to you, easy form is just going to be your absolute standard material. If you're new to splinting, this is your go-to material. So this time, if I actually make a pre-stretch on anything that I want to curve around, then it will make a beautiful angle around and a really nice edge. It cuts beautifully. You'll have a really lovely edging on the easy form, and that will stay. So this is easy form light. So this is the identical material, but this is 3.2 and this is 1.6. So this will behave in exactly the same way in terms of its ability for moldability, but it's half the thickness. And because it's a material that's quite rigid, if you build contour into your splint, you really can make a whole hand splint out of easy form light. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you. And then the last one in this category is sand splint. Now, sand splint, this is the really rubbery one. And in fact, you can hear it as I rub my fingers on it. So this one essentially wants to be flat. So if you're doing something that is a relatively uncontoured splint, you could work with sand splint. But ultimately, don't forget that if you're trying to contour and get around an angle or around an area, you might struggle with sand splint because it will always want to be flat. So until it cools off, you need to keep working with it. So those are all three of the real rigid materials. So what I want to do now is show you the process of making a wrist extension splint, and then you can see a comparison of how I need to work each of the materials because of their attributes. So I have my trusty helper over here, and we're going to just transfer over to an overhead camera so that you can see that I'm going to draw on. There we go, brilliant. I'm just going to bring, well, you get the camera in the right place. Fantastic, that's beautiful. So I have placed my lovely assistant's hand here on some paper towel, and I'm going to draw around. Now, on this occasion, I know I'm doing a wrist extension splint without the hand, so I've let the fingers come off the end of the paper towel. And I'm going to mark my MCP joints, IP joint, MCP, CMC of the thumb, and then the wrist. So I know exactly where I am on the hand. And I'm going to give the hand back and now show you how I'm going to pattern make. So I know I want to leave the fingers free. So I don't want anything there, which means I need to be a good centimetre below the distal palmar crease, because if I come too high up, if I come to the distal palmar crease, as soon as I try to bend, you can see this bashes against it. So in order to have free movements of the fingers, I need to be below the distal palmar crease. I also don't want the thumb in it, so I need to allow the thenar to have space. I'm going to have a little tab coming through, which will go through the center and through that first web space onto the dorsum of the hand. And then this is the diameter of the forearm. For a really well supporting splint, what you're aiming for is about 55% of circumference of the splint. So there is a little bit of try it and see. And I'm going to go for approximately 2 centimeters, maybe 2 to 3 centimeters out from the mark I've drawn, which will be, I'm hoping will represent 50–55% of the circumference. But that always needs to be checked. So I'm going to cut it out. And then I always would check it on my patient. Now, the lovely thing about checking a splinting pattern on your patient is that it gives your patient the opportunity to really see what's expected of them. So you're helping them by explaining the positioning you're going to want to put them in, and then they will be able to do what you want, because ultimately there's nothing more annoying when you're splinting, is there, than a helpful patient. So I'm just going to pop the hand here. We might want to just pop back to the other camera. And this is where I'll just let you see this back. So here we go. I probably want a very tiny bit left on this radial side. So I'm just going to fold it over there to tell myself. But I have got pretty much now 55% of the circumference of the hand. Now this is a little bit awkward for my poor assistant, but can you see now I'm below the distal palmar crease here. This has come below, through the first web space, and I'm supporting the hypothenar eminence here as well. So this I now know is going to fit. And I have a mantra, well, in NES we have a mantra, that the perfect pattern will always make the perfect splint. So I'm just going to cut off that little bit there that I had rolled over, and now I know I have a great splint pattern. So what I'm then going to do is I'm going to place it onto the piece of material, and I'm going to draw around it, but with little lines. Now, I don't need to do a big thick line. I just need to do enough for me to follow and to be able to cut so that I have no pen marks. I am allergic to pen marks on a splint. So then this is going to go into the splint pan, and then we will cut it. In the interim, so that's synergy, and I have got prepared the other materials. So I'm just going to put the Easy Form and the Easy Form Light materials in as well. And we'll just let those heat up. So I've got my splint pan on at about 70 degrees. This will match with almost every single material. So some of them like 2 degrees more, 2 degrees less, but if you just keep your splint pan on at 70, yeah, everything is going to manage itself. So let's just get these ready. Okay. So I'm just going to cut this synergy. Now, when you cut, you want to do really nice, long motions with your scissors. I use tiny scissors because I've got really little hands, but really long sweeps. Don't do lots of little ones like this, because every time you do that, you'll get a little strange edge. Now, I drew on the outside of my pattern, which means I can cut on the inside of my pattern, absolutely confident that this is going to fit, because I had a perfect pattern, so I can totally trust it. So here we go. Here's my synergy. Now, this will need to be reheated. So although it's one that holds heat well, it's lost too much heat here on this cold day, so I need to put it back into the splint pan. So while that just heats up, let's have a go with Easy Form. Like I said, this is going to be your absolute go-to splinting material. So I'm going to ask the patient not to help me. Now, again, if you do a little bit of a pre-stretch on the areas that are going to go around an edge, then this is really going to help me to mold it. So I'm going to, can you see there? This is exactly the right size. It's exactly as I'd cut it. So that's going to hold the hand beautifully secure. And I'm going to work this material. It folds really nicely between the web space. I'm going to just roll it down a little bit in the palm underneath the distal palmar crease. And now I'm going to get it to mold really nicely into the palm, because palms aren't flat. You know, you've got to deal with concave and convex areas. Now, the nice thing with Easy Form is it won't mark. In fact, none of these materials in this family will mark. So you don't need to worry too much about leaving your fingerprint in anything. But what you don't want to do is push in a single place. So keep your hands moving and make sure that they are really gently, gently, gently following the contour of the skin. I will turn this around for you to have a look at it in a second. Now, if you're in a really hot room, then it can help to have a cold tap running. And when the shape and position is right, then you can actually just take the splint away and you can just dunk it into cold water, which will speed up the fixing of your position. But otherwise, you will just need to hold it. But you can see with EasyForm, I actually didn't need to do very much with it. And yet it has molded around really, really nicely. So just to show you, I folded this down here. I folded it in here to get some lovely edges. So we'll just leave that one here. And now just compare with EasyForm Light. Now you might think, well, how can you do a 1.6 material for such a big splint? But this is what's great about EasyForm, because there's enough contour in this material, then I really can get the same amount of rigidity. So it's much lighter for the patient. Again, it's identical, so you can see it fits perfectly there. And it will work in exactly the same way. Obviously, a thinner material has a shorter working time. So you just need to move a little bit quicker. But now again, I mean, I'm really having to do very, very little for it to hold itself into position. And it's slightly tacky to the skin. So because it's slightly tacky to the skin, I can even let go and it just sorts itself out, which is lovely. So here we have the EasyForm Light version. So same material, half the thickness. I'll let that go off and then I'll show you how rigid it is. Now compare that with Synergy. So this does need to be worked. Like I said, if I do a pre-stretch on this, the same as I did, it is just going to bounce back. So if I place this into position and try and do the identical, I will actually need to work it quite hard because it will want to bounce back. It's just that little bit more rigid. I have to work a little bit harder to get this material to follow such contour. But again, if I was doing something like an elbow splint where there's less contour, it would be completely fine. I just thought I would do the same thing so you can see a comparison of how to handle. But you can see with this, you see it's bouncing back. So unlike with EasyForm that stayed in position, this one I need to keep working and keep working. And Synergy is this one that holds heat really well. So your working time is very long, which is great for something like a neuro splint if you need to take that bit longer to manage tone. But it does take a lot more handling. You can't just let it go like I did with this one and let it just cool itself. Whereas this one, I have to just keep working it, keep working it. And if I were to take it off now, this will just open out. So I have to be able to keep working it until it has reached room temperature or nearly, or you can bandage it on, or you can have a strap ready to go. Okay, so you'll understand that this is just going to open itself out a little bit. I might just put it here against another surface to hold it in. And then the last one in this category is the sand splint. Now this is your one that is really rubbery. This is the one you can hear again. You can really hear it squeaking. This is the one that's going to take the hardest work. Rubber just wants to be straight. So if I work this, I'm really going to have to work it. This one is also holding the heat a lot, isn't it? Sorry. Okay, so again, perfect pattern makes a perfect splint. I don't even need to worry about where it is because I know it's going to fit, but I can't let go because it just will continuously want to go back to being flat. So this one probably takes the most work of all the materials, but it does allow a little bit of bounce in it. So if you want something that has a little bit of give, then this will always retain that little bit of give. But can you see it just constantly wants to be flat. and that's purely the rubber content within it. So I'll leave that for now, and you can just see, you see it just flops. So again, I would have to just keep going, keep going, keep going until it has taken its rigidity. So while that holds on there, get gravity to work with me. I'm just going to pop the next 3 in here. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'll take that one off, thanks. Okay, so we've now got our 4 splints. I said I would show you easy form. You can see it really is pretty rigid, but so is easy form light. So because I've got loads of contour, it's got a lot of rigidity. So this really would be enough to hold a hand. Sorry, my hand's quite a lot smaller. It really would be strong enough to hold. And here you go, we've got the Synergy one. Again, it's nice and strong, but it will retain a bit of bounce in it, as will the Sand Splint one. If we have time, I'll just talk about putting straps on these in a minute. But let's move on to the second category. So the second category are those materials that are really moldable. So we've got 3 again. So we're going to look at Tailor Splint, then Polyflex and Polyform. So if I ask my lovely model to just hold her hand like this, if I place this, it just gives you an idea of how moldable these materials are one to another. Now with Tailor Splint, I have to work it into the knuckles. But can you see, I mean, not that this is a splint you'd ever want to make, but just to demonstrate how it actually molds, but it will take shape really, really nicely, but I have to work to get it there. But it's beautifully moldable, and it will take whatever you want. So it will go with whatever you want it to do, okay? But with these 2, Polyflex and Polyform, this is Polyform, this will, with gravity, will find its own way. So I don't have to work this nearly as much. So this will pretty much find its way into all of these crevices. I'm not having to, you can see that this has taken on the shape of the knuckles here without me actually having to do very much. So like I said, if you're starting with a moldable material, one that's not going to run away from you would be Tailor Splint. Whereas Polyflex 2 and Polyform, they really are moldable. And some people think of them as being a bit more like chewing gum. And if you have a big piece and you just hold it by the top, it will extend, and you really don't want it to do that. But it will mold beautifully. And I'll show you Polyflex 2 as well. This one is a little bit thinner. This is a 2.4. But again, I mean, I barely have to do anything, and it's just going to take the shape. So this, I would say, I love, but you've got to be an experienced splinter to be able to cope with these materials, because they will run away with you if your handling skills are a little bit all over the place. But you can see it's just so moldable, but it will pick up everything, every fingerprint, every bit of nail that goes on it. It will absolutely, it's completely unforgiving, but makes the most beautiful moldable splinting material. So let me show you how that works in terms of an actual splint. So I'm going to make a little thumb splint, because that's where these moldable materials really come into their own, when you've got to mold around a thumb. So if we just place the hand here, and I'm going to make a dorsal based thumb splint. So I'm going to bring this around, curl it underneath the IP joint. And again, compared to those other splinting materials from the first family, can you see how easy it is? I don't have to do anything to fold anything over. This just supports the thumb completely. And I've had to do very little. Again, a perfect pattern makes a perfect splint. It's just sitting in place. And that just, and you can see it molds. you know, the demand of a material to get through that first web space and come around, it really does need to be very moldable. And like I said, if you're new to these moldable materials, tailor splint is the one to try first of all, because it's the least likely to run away from you. So we're really respecting the nice arches of the hand, so it's nice and curved, comfy. Okay, so there's our first one. So that's tailor splint, okay, which is there. I would normally leave that on a little bit longer. And then let's have a look here at polyform. So polyform, they all come, as I said, in different colours. So don't think that always white is Polyflex 2 and always blue is polyform and always beige is tailor splint. It's not like that at all. But again, you can see I have to do very little because it just loves these corners. Now this is a relatively small splint, so it's not going to run away from me. But if this was a big splint, I would really have to be very careful how I handled it, particularly at this 3.2 thickness, because it really would just run away from you a little bit. But yeah, again, I have to do practically nothing. Now the difference here, rather than with tailor splint, this is pretty straight. But if I look here, this with polyform has actually picked up the nuance of contour without me doing anything of the metacarpals. So it's really followed that without any efforts whatsoever. And then Polyflex 2 is going to behave very similarly. This is a bit thinner, but the behavior doesn't change. So again, I'm just rolling down underneath the IP joint. And again, I don't have to do anything and it's just going to pick up the contour over the back. So the difference again is that one of them is more rigid when it is cool compared to the other. So that would be the only reason you would choose one from the other. I tend to use Polyflex 2, but that's just personal preference. And again, very little effort. I have to do very little. Okay, we'll leave that on there just to settle. That's lovely. Well, I just show you the last category. So the last category are the aquaplasts. So this is Pro-Drape. We've got Pro-Drape, we've got the watercolors, which comes in all these lovely colors. We've got Aquaplast T. And these really will behave very differently because they're elastic memory materials. So all of these, the purples, the blues, etc. Now, they are, as we call, memory materials. What that means is that if I make a change, if I extend it, if I push or pull, which you really, if you're pattern making, you shouldn't have to do. But if you push or pull, what you're going to find is that you can just put it back into the splint pan if you're serial splinting, and it will go back to its original form. Now, what that also means is that if you want a really lovely edge like you'll get on all the other materials, the non-memory materials, then you do have to be able to cut and mold in one go. Because as soon as you cut, so here I've got my Aquaplast T, if I want really lovely sealed edges on this, then they're beautiful sealed edges. But the minute I then put that back in the splint pan, of course, it's a memory material. It's going to pop open again. So again, it's really good for small splints, but if you want those lovely edges, you probably need to avoid these multi-perforated ones, and you need to avoid it on big splints because you're going to have to reheat before you mold. So let me just show you an advantage of Aquaplast. And that is, even with the paler colours, then it's completely see-through. So when I used to do burns and we work with collars and things, it's lovely because I can actually see through it. So if I want to get some idea of what's happening underneath, Aquaplast is just beautiful because I can see. So if you're avoiding an area with a wound, if you're trying to avoid a little sticking out K-wire, whatever, you can see straight through it. And the pale blue, pale green, they'll still be opaque enough for you to see through. It's just the darker colours that you can't. Now, again, you can see it's incredibly moldable. So these are lovely for any sort of splint, to be fair, as long as you can cope with the memory aspect of it. But again, you can see it just takes position without me having to do very much to it at all. And once it's at room temperature, it's going to go back to that whitish colour here. So that's Aquaplast T. It's not going to stick to itself. So it's got a coating on it. So that won't stick. In comparison to the normal Aquaplast, and that would stick. This is the Pro Drape. So this one is just that little bit more drapey. So again, it should, if you've got gravity working with it, it should pretty much take that position without you having to do anything for it. But it does behave very similarly to Aquaplast T, to be fair. Again, a little bit tacky, okay? But nothing like as tacky as, because it will come apart. If you do that with normal Aquaplast, that's it, it's stuck. And then finally, we've got our lovely watercolours. So you can see here, like with all the standard materials, I actually can't see through it, but patients love it in gold and silver and blue. It molds very, very nicely. Okay, so you can see it's very moldable. So these Aquaplast, this whole Aquaplast family is more on the moldable side, but has that extra ability. So if I pull this, okay, so it's now what, twice its length, and put it back into the splint pan, it will immediately shrink back down to its original shape and size. So there we go, there we go. And now if I take that out, you can see it, I'm back to where I started. Okay, so you can push and pull a little bit with it and know that if you put it back into the splint pan, it'll just go back to its normal size. Like I said, if you're a pattern maker, the amount of pushing and pulling you have to do is very little, because essentially your splint's just going to fit every time you do it. Maybe that's another webinar that we could do. So I just want to go back to a little bit of how you make these splints really good. So the splint itself is all very well, but unless you have great strapping, then it's no good to you at all. So I'm going to go back to this wrist extension splint. This is my easy form. Now you can see this is truly rigid now. So if I pop this on here, it should be comfortable. It's obvious, so well contoured that it's obvious when it's in the right place. Nobody can wear it in the wrong place. Now, how do you get really nice straps that stay on? Now, we know from the literature of only about 20% of patients wear their splints as we want them to wear them. So let's not give them an excuse for not wearing them, because either they've got pen marks on them, they don't like the look of it, or the straps come off. And this is something that patients complain about all the time. Now, I wouldn't normally put black straps on a white splint, but it's just because it's easier for you to see them. Always curl your edges. If you curl your edges, it's much less likely to come off. When you've got a strap going on across a transverse part of the body, so arm, upper arm, then it's much better to put a single one rather than one piece here and one piece here. Why is that? Because when I have the Velcro on it, I'm constantly pulling from the center, rather than if I put it here, I'm constantly pulling on one end. So it's much more likely to come off. The other thing you can do is just heat the glue. If you just slightly heat the glue, it makes it much more likely that it's going to stay on. So there we have our two main straps. One's going to come here. Now, always, the other thing, make sure you cover up all of the hook Velcro. Again, people stop wearing their splints because it pulls. If you leave a little bit of the hook Velcro visible, it will pull all the fibers out of a jumper, your lovely silk negligee, and it will really upset people. So let's just make sure we get that right. And then the critical one here, one that's going to come across the hand. So again, I'm going to cut this, heat it. Place this on. Now, always do one side first. So when I place this on in position, I don't want to have my strap coming onto something here because you can see that that's at a funny angle and it's not going to be comfortable. So always just see where this comes to, and then when you've got the Velcro completely flat, that's when you know where to put the other end. So I'm again just going to heat this up. Look at where this comes to, get this in the right place. And then this is going to sit here. Never cut anything while it's still on your patient, of course. Now, if you really want to make this a lovely Chanel level splint and really have it so that it feels super duper comfy, then contour foam is your best friend. If you line the strap with contour foam across, all of a sudden, it is a completely different feeling for that patient. The other thing is, if you are managing tone, then this is a really nice way of getting control of that, or in fact contractures. And so I would generally line all of my splints with a little bit of contour foam, and it does feel completely different, much more secure. This is now going to be a hand that can truly move. And if you look, I don't know, you can see that we're low enough down now below the distal palmar crease. So we've got really good flexion here, not going to get in the way. The thumb can move around, but it's utterly rigid around the wrist and very protected. So I think that was everything I was going to show you. And we can just open the floor to some questions. I'm just going to go and look at the chat. See if anybody's come up with some questions that you'd like to ask. I've got other bits of material here, so if there's anything anyone wants to see.
Yes, we do have a few questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, do you have any suggestions for ways to reuse or recycle TP?
Okay. Would it be really terrible of me to suggest that there is another supplier and they do collect all of the scraps and everything is sent off and used in plastic furniture, garden furniture making? But it's one of my things to try and deal with in my new role at Performance Health. It's on my agenda to look at both packaging and also the eco credentials of our materials and recycling. It's really important.
Perfect. We have another question. So do you always fabricate splints with you in front of the patient? And does it depend on the patient slash splints slash presentation?
That's a really good question. So the question, I don't know if you could hear it, is do I always work in front of the patient? Some people really like to work across, and obviously this is a plinth, it's a bit too wide, but across a hand table or something. I personally always like to work across a right angle. So I always place my patient with their affected hand, if it's one hand, on the side where it's facing me so they can support their elbow. It also gives me the ability to move the hand down if I want to work with gravity and work with where I want to be in the pronation, supination plane as well. So yes, I do generally work across a right angle, but that is a really personal thing.
Perfect. The other question is, I have someone with Erb's palsy. Wrist is flexed, MCP is extended, hips and dips flexed, very complicated. What would be the best material to create a splint?
Okay, so it sounds like you're going to have to do some serial splinting because you're never going to be able to correct that positioning. So this is a very common position for anybody who has, for example, high edema levels. So we're talking about wrist flexion, MCP extension, and IP flexion. I suspect you've also got thumb adduction as well. So this is a very common position, and this is the complete antithesis to the position of safe immobilization, which is wrist extension, MCP flexion, IP extension, and abduction of the thumb. The best material, well, you know what I'm going to say, is probably easy form. Partly because it really will give you the rigidity you need. It will also give you the conformability you need. And it will also withstand probably 6 to 8 remoldings out of a single splint. And it won't compromise the material if you repeatedly heat it and remold it. The other thing I would say is actually it is partly about the material. You could get away with actually a fair few different ones, and I might be tempted to use Polyflex, for example, but I'd probably more likely use Easyform. But it's about the straps. The straps are the thing that are going to be able to maintain the position of the hand. Remember, you're not trying to push anything into position. You want to hold someone in their comfortable end of range, which is why you're going to have to serially bring the wrist into extension, serially bring the MCPs into flexion. But if you have IPs flexed and you don't get the strap in the right place over the IP joint, then the fingers will just pull in. So it really is about having a strap. I would always use contour foam, and I would always have it at an angle across, so that it goes across the PIP joints like so that it really holds them in position. Because if you go straight, the little finger and the ring finger will just pull out. And of course, what that means is that on the front of the splint, you've got to make sure you get your receiving pieces of hook Velcro in the right place. I didn't actually make one of those, but I can potentially show you if we run out of questions, but hopefully that's answered the question.
Yeah, we do have a few other questions.
Okay.
So we have a request, actually, a pattern making webinar would be super useful. So
okay, no problem.
And then another question, do you roll every edge? And if so, may I ask why?
I don't roll every edge, no, absolutely not. I think there are two that I would commonly do. One would be around the thumb. If I want thumb motion, it doesn't matter whether it's IP, MP, or CMC, I would generally roll that to allow as much motion as possible. I would also roll probably under the distal palmar crease. Again, it's just more comfortable. This is quite a bony area of the hand. So if you've got a material that just behaves and you're not faffing about the splint because you've got a pattern that fits, you've got ample time, as you saw, ample time, then this just gives you that ability to have a nice smooth edge there. And then the only other one that I sometimes do is I'll dunk the proximal end of the splint back into the splint pan, and I'll just run my hand along here so that you don't have one point where it absolutely finishes and you get a nicer curved edge. It takes 3 seconds. And I truly think that these little things that you can do take it from a good or effective splint to an excellent splint and one that someone will actually wear.
Perfect. Next question is, what would be your go-to material for post-fasciectomy?
Okay, so fasciectomy, so Dupuytren's disease. So after the surgery, then obviously it's been addressing the contracture, and the surgeons have managed the fascia, but they haven't, of course, taken away the Dupuytren's disease. So there's still the capacity to flex or to contract, and of course they've now got scars, which also contract. So I would generally make a hand-based splint, although occasionally if there is some work done in the palm as well, or more proximal, then I will actually go to forearm. But most of the time I'll make a hand-based finger extension splint. And my go-to material for that is probably EasyForm 1.6, because it's very rigid with the contour in it. I wouldn't make just a flat piece that comes along the volar surface. I'm pointing to the ulnar side because it's usually the ulnar fingers, but I wouldn't just make a flat piece. That will just bounce. That's no good at all. It's got to have contour in it. You've got to have an edge on the fingers. You've got to have an edge around the hypophyma. But if you get that contour into it, then EasyForm Light is very manageable. And again, it will withstand 6 to 8 remoldings without the splint being affected. So you really can work with your patient to follow their ability as you bring them back out again during that sort of period of healing.
Perfect. Next question is, can you reheat a splint the following week with Velcro on, or would you have to start again as the Velcro will no longer be sticky?
Oh no, the Velcro, if you have stuck your, can I borrow your splint that I did? If I take this off. So if I wanted to remold this, all I would do is I'll just take the Velcro straps off, the loop Velcro straps off, and I've heated this Velcro on with the heat gun. I can put it in over and over and over again and completely remold it. Those straps are not coming off at all. So that's why it's really worth investing the 3 seconds that it takes to round your edges and heat with the heat gun, because then, you know, yes, you can reheat that as many times as you like. I'll let this heat up, and then I'll show you that it's completely moldable with no problems at all.
Perfect. The other question is, can you explain why the contour foam is good for spasticity, sorry, high tone.
So contour foam is really nice if you've got a part of the body that has high tone and is trying to pull against a splint. So for example, if you've got a wrist that is trying to pull into a flexor tone position, then if you just put Velcro, it can be a little bit abrasive against the skin. Now, I would normally use a wider strap in the presence of tone. And I just find that contour foam just holds position. It also means that you are spreading the pressure, not that there's very much pressure, but enough pressure to hold position. You are spreading it absolutely equally across the whole of the skin that you're touching, which means that you are far less likely to cause skin abrasion or skin pressure points, and it will hold position, because the edges of the Velcro can be a little bit abrasive, and if all you need is tone to, you know, to pull against that constantly, and you might get a little bit of a sore. So that's why I love it. And try it, but it gives splints that feeling of being hugged and nurtured, because it feels so comfortable. Now, before you just go on to the next question, let me just show you from that last question. So I've now got this splint is completely soft again, and this is not going anywhere. I mean, I can't pull that off. It's, yeah, this is staying. If I worked really hard, maybe I could get it off, but no, this is now a splint that you can remold and remold and remold with no problems.
Next question. Would you be willing to share the thumb splint pattern? It looks easier than the butterfly splint.
Yes, of course. I actually did do a pattern, so I can show you that for sure. If we just go to the overhead camera, just in case someone asks this, this is the whole blue Peter, here's one I made earlier scenario. So this is me going around. In fact, it was my hand. You can see my hand here, fitting on the blue. And you can see I've marked, again, MCPs, 3 joints of the thumb and my wrist. I love this pattern. I make this a lot for people. So again, what I like to do when I'm pattern making is think about what I don't want, which I know is a bit strange, but I think it's really important to think about what needs to be free. So we want to make sure that the wrist is completely free. So I want to pull the splint away from the wrist. We want to make sure that the fingers are completely free. So we want to be below the distal palmar crease, which is this line here to here. The critical edge for you is this one. This is where people sometimes make a bit of a mistake, but this is the dorsum of the hand. So this is a bit obvious, that sits over the metacarpals. And this is the piece that's going to come around and hook underneath my thenar eminence. And if you get this angle here, where you're turning in this angle up and then scoot down just under the IP joint, then what you'll see is this fits straight through here, attaches to itself and over the back of my hand. Now there's another little trick. If you've got somebody with, say, Heberden's nodes in their IP joint of their thumb or really swelling here, then what you might want is not to actually stick this piece down, in which case, just take a little bit of paper towel. And as you mold the splinting material around the thumb, again, this was not made on me, as you saw just now, but as you, oh, I can't even wear it. As you mold around the thumb, let's see if there is one I can, this one's a little bit better, but as I mold around the thumb, then if you place a bit of paper towel between the 2 bits of splinting material, it will never stick. So then what you could do is you'll get out of jail free, because some of these materials, like, I mean, this one's okay because it opens out because it's got a bit of a coating on it, but some of them will stick so well that you'll never open that out again. So what's nice is then to have this loose and have a little strap here to here, which stays done up most of the time, but it does give people the ability to open up the thumb and release it if they swell wearing that splint. Yeah, I really like that pattern as well.
We've got a couple more minutes for one last question. Okay. What sort of splint would you fabricate for a PIP joint flexion contracture in attempt to improve extension? Finger gutter splint or POSI splint incorporating the whole hand? Okay. One of my absolute obsessions is PIP joints with flexion contractures. Obviously, the splint makes just one part of lots of different treatment modalities you're going to do, but you need to basically accommodate 2 principles: LLPS, low load prolonged stretch, and TERT, total end range time. So you need to make a splint that holds the finger at its comfortable end of range for at least 6 continuous hours. So I find if it's an angle on the PIP joint that is maybe less than 40-45 degrees, then a finger gutter is enough, with a really good, of course, you know I'm going to say that, a strap with contour foam over the top to hold the PIP dorsally. If you've got more of a contracture, then what I tend to find is people are more comfortable if you're including the hand with it. But it depends on the patient. If it's more than 1 PIP, I would do POSI, a hand-based POSI, position of safe immobilization. Right, I think we've run out of time. It's 1 minute to 2, I believe. So thank you so much. Great questions.
like I said before, we will be, everything has been recorded. I think a link to the recording will be sent to you after the webinar. If you want to contact Performance Health, then please do. If you've got ideas for webinars or anything that can be helpful for you, then let us know. And have a great afternoon.